Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Chris Tighe, one-time member of the indie band Cody, and they've got a slight Sarah record connection, and they do appear in the Michael White book, which is titled Pop Kiss as well, and they were on Matt's label, Shinkansa Recordings, and Shifty Disco as well, I do believe. Anyway, look, you're going to find out much more about Chris and the band and his musical journey in the next 50 minutes, possibly. I'm not counting. Anyway, look, after several minutes of casual chat, we got down to that very exciting subject that was the early formative years. And yes, I edit my bit out where I babble on, and he talks about his. Anyway, Chris, it's over to you.
I was born in 67, so I was a child of the summer of love.
Yes.
My parents went to see Jimi Hendrix and the Walker Brothers while my mum was pregnant. So I have heard Jimi Hendrix and the Walker Brothers through the wall of the womb, which is great. Which sort of might have affected the kind of music that I liked when I eventually started growing up. But that was some. Well, we didn't have an awful lot of records in the house when I was a kid. I mean, so neither of my parents were particularly musical, but what they did have was quite effective to me. Really, there were no Beatles records in the house, for instance. My dad was a big Rolling Stones fan, and my mum preferred Cliff. So, and there was a time, I think, 1976, Christmas 1976. My dad got a copy of ABBA's Arrival album as a Christmas present.
Is that the one with the helicopter on the front?
That is the one with the helicopter, yeah. The one that's got Dancing Queen on it, Knowing Me, Knowing You, plenty of...
I Am the Tiger as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that, funnily enough, that was the most important song for me, on the album, because I was only about 8 or 9 at the time, and this ABBA album was probably the first real pop album that had existed in my house and therefore in my life at the time. And I like Dancing Queen the way that everyone did, even if they were very young. It's just a song that appeals to everybody.
Yes.
But what I really liked about that album was it had this wide spread of sound on it. You had Dancing Queen, was a disco song, like Knowing Me, Knowing You, this really sad song, and then there was a song about being a tiger, going to a city eating people. And when you I kind of recognise that that's metaphorical now, but when you're about 8, you think, great, she's singing a song about being a tiger eating people, and then this is a pop group and they're singing about this sort of thing. So that sort of that hit me hard, really. I got very excited about.
Well, absolutely. Did there was another track on that album about kissing the teacher?
Yeah. The first track was When I Kissed the Teacher. So.
When I Kissed the Teacher. Yeah,
I just want to get away with that now.
No, and then obviously the Police had another one. Don't stand so close to me.
Of course,
most of the songs of the 60s and 70s would be bad. People wouldn't be able to get in the right headspace to sing or write those songs, because you just it would just be like, no, that's wrong. Because there was a time, I remember when I was growing up, bands used to sort of talk in a very loose way when they were being interviewed, mostly on the Old Grey Whistle Test or various programs, and people say, oh, why did you get into music? And they go, oh, it was sex, drugs and rock and roll. And I remember there was a time when I thought, God, you don't hear that phrase anymore, do you? Someone must have said, don't say that anymore. Say sex, drugs and rock and roll. Just say it was because you liked entertaining lovely people. But it wasn't those three things.
Yes, I have to say that was not the reason why I got into indie pop.
No, but your parents though, I mean, okay, they didn't went into the Beatles, they were into Stones, but they went, oh, Jimi Hendrix is on, crazy stuff, let's go and see this man. And by the way, the Walker Brothers, not a bad support band, I guess.
Yeah.
For £1.50p. So yes, how did
it probably was that much, to be honest. Yeah.
Yes, probably Rod Stewart was supporting.
I think Hendrix was actually supporting the Walker Brothers. I think the Walker Brothers were the headline act on that tour.
Whereabouts was this?
That was in Chesterfield. I can't remember the exact sort of location where it was. It's a lot of venue that's like no longer exists, some ballroom or other.
Yeah.
I did find a poster for it a couple of years ago.
I would have been very excited by that.
Yeah.
So so that was that a bit of a surprise when you look back on it, that suddenly they went, yes, we're going to go and see the Walker Brothers and Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, I didn't actually find out about it until about 10 or so years ago. My sort of parents knew that I was really into music, and they knew by this point that I was into 60s music, but they just didn't have, they just didn't think to mention.
Just casually said, "Oh
yeah.
yes, that Mr. Hendrix."
We saw the Walker Brothers once. Jimi Hendrix was on with him. Oh yeah, Jimi Hendrix was on. Yeah, he was quite good, wasn't he? And I was like, what? You never told me this.
Yes, God, that's amazing. Yes, so that's very good. So when did you start thinking about playing an instrument or sort of making music, or was this something that came along much later?
That came along a lot later, I think. My sort of sister took her guitar lessons. She was about 4 years younger than I was, but I found that a little difficult to do because I've got quite small hands, so I got a bit annoyed trying to learn classical guitar because the neck was a bit too big. So that's why I kind of gave up trying to play anything really until my 20s. Up until then, I was a consumer of music, should we say, a fairly avid one,
so was
a regular gig goer as well.
Was the classic indie world of the 80s, was that something that you picked up on straight away?
I think so, yeah. Well, the way that it happened was I started getting into music in like the late 60s, no, late 70s, with that like ABBA album, and like my dad had got the Rolling Stones Rolled Gold compilation album the following year, which sort of got me really into the 60s Stones stuff. But then in 1979, synth pop happened. Like Gary Newman came along, and there were like other groups like OMD, Human League, and I really, really liked that. So that was the first kind of music that was not of my parents' generation, say, that I really, really liked.
Yeah.
So like, as a result of that, I particularly liked the Human League, who were a fairly local band to me. They were from Sheffield. I was from Chesterfield, that was literally 10 minutes away, like, on the train. So they were a very local band to me, and that meant that I got into other local Sheffield bands as well. And like there were other sort of synth bands around Sheffield around that time, such as Vice Versa, who eventually became ABC. But so because I liked that sort of Sheffield bands, I also started hearing bands like Cabaret Voltaire that were like also from that area, but were a bit more strange. And I found out, those are the kind of bands you'll hear on this radio show by this man called John Peel. He plays all that weird stuff.
Yes.
And as a result of that, I started listening to John Peel in my mid-teens, the way that I think pretty much everyone in my generation that liked alternative music did. And that just allowed me to hear all the classic sort of Peel bands, like the
So what was your first gig? What was your first gig you went to?
Amazingly enough, the first gig that I ever went to that was not like school bands was the Membranes.
Oh, good on
John Robb's band. Yeah, this was around the time they were on Creation. I think they just released that album, sort of Gift of Life, and like they were doing a tour of like small provincial towns, and they played in what I think was a wine bar in Chesterfield, just at the basement.
Right.
I think I was about 16, 17 or something like at the time, and and I'd already got a couple of Membranes records. I'd got Spike Milligan's tape recorder, their classic single.
Yes.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to go and see a band. I'm going to go to see the Membranes at a wine bar in Chesterfield, surrounded by all these slightly scary punks when I'm a kind of geeky 16-year-old.
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, so like rather than my first gig being, I went to see the Bay City Rollers with my mum and dad, it's like I went to see the Membranes in a dingy wine bar. So that's what set me off on seeking out crummy small gigs really,
Yeah.
and just not really wanting to see sort of large size arena shows, which I've very rarely gone to.
So when you hit 16, which was probably about 1983, that was the year of the Smiths. Did indie pop have a big influence on your life, or did it just pass you by?
Well, when the Smiths came along, they made a pretty big impression on me. Yeah, I really, really liked the Smiths for like several years. Obviously, it's quite difficult to like them now because of Morris's twists and turns in sort of recent years. But around that time, they were just like very, very important bands. I mean, given that I'd been really into electronic music, the fact that the Smiths came along and they were like very, very defiantly electronic, they would not have any synthesizer. They were a total guitar band. They were probably the first sort of total guitar band that I really, really liked. And that kind of set me off onto sort of liking a lot of like other sort of guitar-based bands like Orange Juice and that I'd not bothered listening to before, but that would get mentioned in the same breath as the Smiths. And so I started getting much more into guitar music, and then in like 1985, 1986, that whole kind of C86 scene came along, and it was just exactly what I wanted to hear at like that time. So I was like really, really into that stuff.
Well, I know it did sort of explode, didn't it? I mean, I think in that slightly sort of simplistic way. I love the simplistic way, and it was like you had that punk, then post-punk, and then. For me, the Smiths come along, opened that chapter for indie pop, and sort of from 83 to 87, it was definitely something happening. And then when they broke up, Ecstasy came along, and then there was kind of a new 16 to 18-year-olds who, every 16 to 18-year-old want their own scene, and they don't really want to sort of worry about what the older 20-somethings are talking about and reminiscing. They want their own band. So, and then, you had the rave culture, and then you had grunge come. Things did move really, really quickly at that stage. So, so were you forming and sort of thinking about being in a band at that stage?
Not in the C86 era, like at all. No, because I was a fanzine editor around that time. So I was geared more towards writing about music than actually making music. I sort of didn't start trying to write songs or trying to play, I think probably until about 1990 time.
Right.
I think. And then a lot of that was just sort of recording stuff in my bedroom on a little tape recorder with a guitar that sort of didn't have a neck that was too fat for me to get my hands around.
Yes. Well, that's good. I'm glad, because
I
had a go and I just thought, God, I'm hopeless. This is never going to happen. I'll just put a record on instead, which is a bit disappointing, isn't it? It's a bit pathetic. So, yes. So then when sort of things like, the 4AD label, of which, had people like Dead Can Dance and the Cocteau Twins, Throwing Muses and the Pixies and all that kind of scene, were you kind of still kind of excited and consuming music with great gusto?
Well, 4AD bands, I really love those as well. The Cocteau Twins, I can remember hearing John Peel playing the first thing they ever put out. I think Speak No Evil. I think that was a single.
Right.
I can remember him like playing that, and it sounded to me, because of its noise guitar, drum machine, weird vocals style, it sounded like a lot of the goth music that I'd quite liked around that time as well.
Yes.
Like sort of the early Sisters of Mercy, the March Violets, that were also bands that had noisy guitars, drum machines, and sort of slightly weird vocals. So,
and did you get into people like the Cult and the Cure and the Mission and bands like that?
I like the Cure. The Cult and the Mission were a bit too rock for me, to be honest. I liked Sisters of Mercy, but only when they had like drum machines going. Like as soon as they kind of split in half, didn't they? There was like the Andrew Eldritch Sisters of Mercy with the Meatloaf Jim Steinman sound, and like the Mission coming out the other side. I didn't really like either of those very much.
No, I didn't. I shouldn't confess, but I didn't realise that Jim Steinman production song was, I hadn't sort of yes, I'd heard the song, but I hadn't realised the Jim Steinman connection until he died. And I went, that's interesting. I didn't realise, where are they now? But, well, not Jim Steinman, obviously, but the other members. Yes, weird. Yes, and did you, talking of Sheffield, were you into bands like the 1,000 Violins. Did they
Yes, I
come?
like. They did, though. They kind of arrived a little later for me. I think I didn't really hear them until about 1986.
Right.
It was when they'd already put out quite a few singles. They were a band name that I'd heard. I'd heard the name, and I knew that they were famous for writing songs with like really long, convoluted titles.
Yes.
But I didn't actually hear them until relatively late, and I really liked them. And then the original singer left about a year after I started liking them, and they got the new singer in.
Yeah,
they
that's
weren't as
right.
good at that point.
Then they broke up, and then the main guy went and formed a band called the Dylans.
Yeah, yes.
Who were still quite.
I never really cared for them very much.
No,
Dylans, they were okay.
So then, what happened during your sort of the early 90s to the Britpop period?
Well, so at that point, I was writing fanzines still. I was living in like Manchester in the C86 like era.
Were you a student in Manchester?
I was a student. Yes.
Did you go to the lads club and have a photograph taken?
I didn't go to the Salford Lads Club, funnily enough. No.
Yes.
It never occurred to me to actually do that until like everyone else started doing it, and I thought, why didn't I do that? I've got friends in Salford, but just never did it. No.
No.
But, once I finished uni, I moved down to Oxford because I got offered a job there. That was the only reason. There wasn't any particular other reason for me to move down there. So because I had moved to a city where I didn't know people, I just carried on doing fanzines down there as a means of like introducing myself to people, really.
Yes,
as much as anything else.
And free CDs and entry to gigs. I mean,
yeah. Didn't work that way back then, I'm afraid. I
it?
Pay to get into everything, yeah.
Not even a free CD?
Not even. Well, I get sent demo tapes. This was around the time when people would still send demo tapes, I think, in the early 90s.
No, it's just MP3s.
Indeed, yeah. Just like here's a link. Here's like a watermark link. If you send it to anyone else, then it will wipe their entire hard drive. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was just an urban myth, though, wasn't it? That if you sort of did something that it would wipe you out. But it probably worked, actually. Yeah. So then you were working in Oxford, which was famous for. What was it famous for during that period? Was it Radiohead?
Well, around the time when I moved down to Oxford, this was before the era of like Radiohead, Supergrass. Say this was when Oxford was most known for bands like Tallulah Gosh and the Razor Cuts.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
Amelia Fletcher. She is literally.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say she should have an OBE, but she probably. I think she's got one actually, or CBE. She's got something for her academic. It's for her academic work at the University of East Anglia, which is just
it's like for her non-musical work. But I'd like to think that she's got it for her music too.
Yes, I think she's the most qualified sort of indie singer songwriter of all time, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, Professor.
Yeah, well,
Fletcher.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, actually, Peter Momchiloff, who was like Tallulah Gosh's guitarist, is like head of philosophy at the Oxford University Press.
Right. Yes, that's true. Actually, yeah. I know the guy from Big Flame. He's a professor in Belfast of architecture. So there's
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yes, I know. I'm full of indie gossip.
Well, that's true, because Big Flame were one of my favourite bands around that time. Oops. That's okay.
Yeah. So yes. So then, working in Oxford, when did things start to happen?
Well, that was probably, I think, around the mid-90s, I think, when things started sort of taking off there. Because I remember the very early days of like Radiohead and Supergrass, because like back when Radiohead were called like On a Friday, and they were sort of more of a Blur type band around then. Because I was at the gig where they got signed, because their like support band for that gig was actually a band that had some of my friends in them. So I'd gone along to support my friends, and sort of turned up at this gig, and there were all these like A&R men there who actually were still wearing things like 1970s satin jackets, like you think old-fashioned record company people would actually wear. There were people wearing that, and it turned out they had all gone to see On a Friday, because like EMI were were like interested, and I think there may have been other labels interested as well. And they came on and like played this stuff that sounded like the first Blur album. They were quite baggy at like that time. They had kaleidoscopes projected over them.
Wow.
And also around that time, I saw what I think was like Supergrass's second gig when they were still called Theodore Supergrass. That was their original name.
Yes.
So of course, I think two of the guys out of Supergrass had been in a band called the Jennifers, who I'd seen a couple of times as well. They were like a teen band. They're kind of like, I suppose the closest Oxford came to McFly or something. They're kind of like teen indie band.
Nice.
So like around that time, obviously, you got sort of Radiohead got sort of picked up by EMI, and then like Supergrass got picked up shortly afterwards. And then things really started sort of taking off then. That was when we got sort of more in the way of decent sized venues and like sort of local music press as well. There's a lot of local music paper that was called Curfew, which
Nice.
I used to write reviews for.
Yes. So
that was when Oxford had enough stuff to write like reviews about.
It's tricky now, isn't it? But so when did your band start to sort of form and come together?
My band formed in 1996, I think. It was late 96, early 97. What had happened was a friend of mine who was another person who'd just been recording songs in his bedroom for like several years, but was quite proficient at it. He had a 4-track and like knew how to record things so they sounded right. He just decided, I'm going to form a band, and like the way that I'm going to do it is like I'm going to ask around, and like absolutely everybody who I know who owns or can play some kind of musical instrument, I'm going to ask if they want to be in my band. So like one day, and so he knew that I had a guitar and I had a little synthesizer. Like even though I couldn't play them particularly well, but I got instruments. And I was a music writer, so like one day I got a little note through my letterbox saying like, "Do you want to join my band?" And so I think there were 6 of us at the time, like originally, all sort of met up in this guy's bedroom. He's like student flat.
Was this with? So there's Joe, John, Stephen, yourself.
Yes, and there were two other members like originally, whose names I cannot remember, to be honest.
It's a cruel world, isn't it?
It is. There was another guy that like played keyboards, and he turned up for our first 3 or 4 rehearsals, and then I think halfway through the 4th rehearsal, we just finished the song, and he just said, "I'm going to go down and watch TV now," and then just left the room and went down to watch telly and like never came back. But we had a lot of violin player too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I cannot remember what her name was, but I think she was American or Canadian, and she lasted as long as our first set of demos. I can kind of hear her in the background sawing away.
Nice.
Until some of our very early like recordings. But she eventually left the band to join a death metal group. It's like she got an offer from them, and they seem to be doing a bit better than us. So,
right.
Yeah. So we were abandoned in favour of death metal.
Yeah, that's quite cruel. But so then, did the sound come together quite quickly?
Well, when we first started, most of the songs were like Joe's songs, and so Joe had some fairly well thought out ideas about what he wanted the songs to actually sound like, even though he was willing for us to make embellishments to them. So yeah, it came together reasonably quickly because the person that was writing most of the songs had fairly strong ideas like already about what they were going to sound like. As we went on, once we got to the point of actually putting out records, we started to work a lot more collaboratively on the arrangement. So like some of the songs ended up sounding like nothing like their authors wanted them to sound. So so originally it came together fairly quickly.
Because I remember Shifty Disco Records. I seem to remember I might have even got a sort of sent a sort of don't know, some sort of review copy of a band, but I can't remember which one it was actually. The Panda Gang, that was it probably.
I think they had a single out on Shifty Disco. I only really remember the first year of like Shifty Disco because they put a single out every month. We were the 9th one of the first year.
That's right. It all sounded really beautiful, didn't it? And such a nice idea and full of optimism and happiness, as you do.
Yeah. But, some of the results were a little inconsistent, I felt. So Oxford had a lot of up-and-coming bands around that time, but I have to admit, I didn't like an awful lot of them.
No. So with Shifty, your single came out, this was in 1997, and this was Simple and Absent-Minded, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now, Simple, I was into prog rock, mainly because my brother was in the 70s, so I followed him. And a lot of their songs lasted a long time, incredibly long. Topographic Oceans was 4 songs on 4 sides of double?
4 songs, about like 18 minutes each side.
So how did you manage to write a song which was your first single or your first kind of, your A side, and it's 8 minutes? That's amazing.
8 minutes 45 to be exact. The demo was only 6.5 minutes. It just got longer and longer as it went on. We were quite fond of grooves, basically, is like what had happened. We had sort of several songs around that time where Joe would just set up a rhythm on the drum machine, and sort of rather than have it programmed, he would just set up a rhythm loop, and we'd just play along, and then he'd decide when it was going to finish by just turning it off. So some of our early material was sort of very much worked up with us just like, I hate to say jamming because we were very against the concept of being a jam band. But sort of looking back on it now, we were essentially jamming on grooves on some of our early songs, and it was very much a case of we're going to carry on doing it till it sounds like a natural point for it to end. And Simple just kept sort of getting longer and longer until it reached a natural point about 8 minutes 45, where we thought that's how long it's going to be. But we didn't actually set out to specifically write a song that was really long. I mean, a lot of our other songs around that time went on a bit as well. Nice. It was quite rare for us to have a single that was less than 5 minutes long.
So with that single, they had 1,000 printed up. Did you get much feedback on that?
Well, it got onto Radio 1, for instance. Steve Lamacq had played it as like unsigned band of the week. I got phoned up at work by sort of record companies wanting to talk to our manager, which we didn't have. We didn't have a manager. So, so it did get quite a lot of encouraging feedback. We were, I would say, briefly hyped. And sort of partly because there were several other Oxford bands around that time that were getting hyped. So there was a scene building, and the music press always loves its little scenes. So we were kind of tagged on sort of to the end of that. I can remember there was an article in Music Week, I think September 1997, where we were described as like one of Oxford's most significant new bands.
Nice.
So just on the back of
what was the live experience like? Were you enjoying playing live?
No, well, we were generally not good live. And basically, we had a lot of technology before the time when it was possible to really do that on stage, because this was the sort of before the era of sort of bringing a laptop on stage and having all the the backing tracks on it. We sort of never had a live bass or a live drummer. The rhythms were always programmed, and we tended to have a lot of effects pedals, so we couldn't really move around very much on stage because you had to stay within the semicircle of effects pedals. And none of us were particularly demonstrative performers, I think it's fair to say. So, so we were playing music that was difficult to reproduce on stage because of technological limitations, and we weren't very charismatic. But in the end, we ended up projecting slides over us so you couldn't see us. But I have a couple of live tapes of us, and it's pretty difficult to sit through. Apparently, some of our gigs were actually good. But it very much depends but it very much depended on the sound man, whether the sound man had decided to make us sound like a horrible noise or not. They were apparently the gigs that were better when we sounded noisy.
Because you did a couple more sort of EPs, Anti-Cylon and then Rounder, which were both on Matt's label. And then you did another one, which was Dark Blue, which was on Kooky Records.
Yes.
From
Kooky Records of Northampton, yes. Yeah. We got asked by sort of Kooky and by Shinkansen at around the same time, like if we wanted to do singles. This was in the aftermath of Simple, when it had become clear that even though we were hyped, we weren't going to end up on a major label, we weren't going to do particularly well. This was largely because of the fact that people sort of came to see us live and then realised we weren't a good live band, because back in those days, it was still really important if you were an indie band that you would play live and that you had to be like good live. So
yes.
So I think that was one of the reasons why we didn't really get anywhere.
Yeah, well, looking back at that kind of period, you know, I don't know, probably the 60s and 70s, but I can remember the 80s and 90s in a way that, you know, we had those 3 music papers, weeklies, which were obviously hugely important. And then you had, John Peel, and then you had, I don't know, Janice Long and probably Steve Lamacq. But then also every little town and city in the country had an alternative indie night, didn't they? And on most of Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday. I mean, Norwich had the Wild Club, and I'm not going to go through around the whole country, but everybody had an indie night where at least 100.
Yes, it was always like early in the week when they couldn't get anyone to turn up to the clubs otherwise. Yeah.
So and so you had all those kind of gigs, and it did help, you know, create that scene. And I guess you were at that point where, you know, playing live was kind of important for just selling the t-shirts, if nothing else. So
we did. We actually did have a few t-shirts made. I think we only ever sort of printed about 10 of them. Sadly, I don't own one. Wish I did.
Yes,
great. It was like a great piece of memorabilia. They were all like extra large for some reason. So I think if I had worn one, it would have just like been like a tent on me.
Actually, there was a lot of baggy clothes in that period, weren't there, as well? So
you could kind of get away with it, provided you didn't try to tuck it in.
Yeah. So when you went to record your first album, which was Steel Point Primer, you have all the material already rehearsed and ready to go before you went in the studio. And what studio did you use?
Well, by that point, we used no studios. Like Dark Blue and like Anti-Cyclone were like recorded in a proper studio, like as was Simple. But so by the time we got to the first album, lo and behold, technology had actually come to our rescue. There was like home recording software that was actually good enough to run on like desktops. So by that time we were literally recording everything in Steve or Joe's front room, or in my bedroom if I was recording my bits when sort of they weren't around. So like the songs were all done. The songs were all like, well, most of them were like rehearsed beforehand. I think there was one song. I think the last song on the album came along really late, and it went straight from being written to being sort of recorded without being rehearsed. But sort of most of the rest of the album was actually songs that we played live.
Yeah,
I think and 9 out of the 10 songs we had played live.
Because there was that sort of mix, didn't there? There was bands like Air and then Daft Punk and Stereolab, and you had that kind of vibe. Who were all influences on us. Air were one of Joe's main influences when he first started writing songs for us. So yes,
he was very keen that we would be a bit like Air.
And then,
he didn't get his way. We didn't sound very much like Air, but they were always there in the background.
And what was the reception like when the album came out?
Muted, I feel. We got some good feedback and like reviews from like online sites, but there wasn't a great deal of actual national press about it. Like Mixmag liked it, strangely enough.
Yes,
we kind of seem to get sort of better press in the dance press than the indie press, which I never quite understood. But I was quite happy to get along with that.
Well, take what you can. But yes, how many copies did that get? Did you? I suppose this is the days of just CD, wasn't it?
It was a CD only release. I don't know how many copies got pressed, to be honest. I've sort of never bothered asking Matt about that, because like we might find out how feeble our sales figures were. But like, they weren't totally terrible. I mean, like, we got royalty checks and everything. I mean, like, we got a royalty check last year for about 15 quid between four of us.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know how many actually got pressed. It was probably in the low thousands, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, most of your material now is on Bandcamp. Are people still discovering the band and sort of yes, enjoying them, or is that just come on Bandcamp, or have you been on Bandcamp for quite some?
We've only been on there for about 2 months.
Right.
It's been one of those things that like I was thinking about doing for ages and then never got around to it, and then like Matt's decided he was going to do a lot of proper Shinkansen Bandcamp page, so that he could link it to the Sarah Records Bandcamp page, which he'd done like a long time ago. And yeah, so like I said, do you want a page as well? And I said, yes, that means I don't have to bother setting it up. So yeah, so Matt set it up as a template, and I put the artwork and the blurbs and the like on it. So we do still get listeners. Like, I get a monthly report, and it's never gone down to 0 listeners. But I don't know whether the listeners we've got are actually a lot of people who are already aware of the bands or not.
People love people love scurrying around and finding new bands. Actually, this is true. So once that album came out, was there sort of general vibe within the group? You know, were you? I mean, obviously, you weren't going to have this as a full-time job, but was it quite a commitment? You know, keeping the band going.
We were all proud of at least some of the material like on the album. We always thought we were good. We were always very aware of what our shortcomings were. I mean, people would always like criticise the vocals, and we knew we weren't the best band ever vocally. But like I think because of the fact that we did get a fair amount of criticism, and it seemed to be difficult for us to make headway, difficult for us to get people to actually pay any attention to us, that strangely made us more determined to like carry on doing it. At the short run. I think because we'd actually done an album which we liked, and which I still think now has got some really good songs on it, that just meant that we want to like carry this on. We've got a label that we like and like respect, and that like wants to put the album out. And like after the album came out, we knew Matt wants to put out more sort of material by us. So yeah, we were committed. So we were committed like to the band. We had a label that was committed like to the band. So we just thought we're just going to like carry on. Like, even though by that point things had got a little more difficult, because we didn't all live in the same place like anymore. Because when we were recording Still Point Primer, we all still like lived in Oxford, so we could theoretically have all gathered together in a room and like rehearse the songs, which we were doing up until the point that we started recording them. But by the time the album came out, we didn't all live in Oxford anymore, so there wasn't any real like opportunity for us to jam, to be a jam band. We sort of definitely couldn't have.
So when you went to put the follow-up Distant Learning together, obviously there was going to be issues to do with not being in the same locality. Did you know when you were doing that album that was probably going to be the final release by the band?
No, we definitely didn't think that at the time. We hadn't really given like any sort of thought as to like how long we were going to like carry it on. We didn't think, oh right, we're going to do 3 albums and then and then see what happens. It was really just an ongoing concern. Well, I think because we just had so much material coming out by like that point, like so much, like in terms of songs that were being written, because like Joe was still writing songs. So like John had started writing a lot of like material as well, and sort of me and Steve to like a lesser extent. So there was loads of songs coming out. I mean, I sort of found all the old demo CDs like a few weeks ago when I was doing a bit of archive searching, and I realised that we had. But when we went into doing distance learning, we probably had about 60 songs that we could have chosen. So
wow, that's very impressive.
so there was there was no lack of material there.
So was it the case then that you were recording your own bits around the country and then just sending them to one person? Who was that one person?
Well, it depended really on who the writer of the song was and sort of who had sort of taken the lead in the arrangement, really. So like they weren't all mixed by sort of one person, though like we obviously all have like final say. I mean, so I think Steve mixed some of the songs, Joe mixed some, sort of definitely. I didn't because I wasn't au fait with the mixing software at like that time. But sort of what would happen is that like whoever had sort of taken charge of the mixing for that song would sort of do their mix of it. They'd sort of send it around to all of us, and we would critique it or would give it a thumbs up. And so the final mixes would be the result of us all sending emails around saying, "Oh, I don't like that bit of filtering on the first verse. Could you turn that down a bit? Oh, I think guitar needs to be louder." You would say that because that's you playing it. Well, I can't hear the keyboard on this. You know?
Yes.
So like the mixers would go round in circles until sort of something sort of came up that we were all happy with.
Yeah, the 11 tracks. And when you sent it to Matt, was he pleased? Did he sort of have to kind of okay it as well?
I mean, like, I don't think he would have released it if he didn't like it, if he didn't think it was up to scratch. No, I mean, like, because he's not a record company boss who puts contracts into bands' hands. Like everything was literally just like an email handshake. I mean, he had not made any legal commitments to release the music. We had not made any legal commitment to even give him any music. So it was a case of we would send it to him, and like if he liked it, then he would put it out. And thankfully he sort of did like it. We kind of disagreed on what the single ought to be, but like that was about the only disagreement that we had.
Yeah. And who designed the album cover?
That was Steve. Steve did all the artwork for like all of our releases. He was the real graphic design guy out of the band.
Yes. What's symbolic about this building?
I don't know, to be honest. I think it's in Berlin. I think Steve was very into architectural photography at the time, and I think he liked the fact that like when you turned it on its side, it wasn't immediately clear what it was.
Right. Nice. Yes. And then what was the reception like when the album came out?
I kind of feel that it disappeared into a void. It got less press than Steel Point Primer did, and it was quite difficult to buy it in shops as well, which I thought was a bit sad.
Right.
Because you couldn't get it in like any of Oxford's record shops, which I thought was a bit unfortunate. I mean, when sort of Steel Point Primer came out, I was still working at the Virgin Megastore in like Oxford, so that I could make sure that they stocked Cody's releases.
Yes.
But sort of by the time of like distance learning, I'd sort of moved out of retail. I'd just given up on it. It was doing my head in a bit too much. So I was working in a totally different area of work, and so I couldn't influence buying decisions made by our local music shops.
Yeah. So was it after that release? Did you have a band get together? Did you tour this at all? Did you sort of play mini live shows at this stage?
No, well, we didn't play like any shows for distance learning, sort of, because by the time that album came out, not only were we not all in Oxford anymore, we weren't all in the UK like anymore. John was living in like Italy by the time that the album came out. So,
right.
And I think Steve was up in Glasgow. Like me and Joe were still in Oxford, and I know shortly after Steel Point Primer came out, we tried playing a couple of gigs just as a two-piece with like backing tapes.
Yes.
Just to try to like promote the album, but that just didn't work very well at all. I think we only did 2 gigs in that configuration, and it was obvious, like, to us on stage, I think to the audience, that was not working, so we didn't bother doing it. So like after that, we never played live anywhere.
Yes. Did you ever get together again to meet up, or was it just a series of emails that went around?
It really was at that point just like So like email communication, yeah. This is before we even had Zoom, you see. So like,
No, my God,
this.
Zoom was
Yeah,
only last year. No, it was just a sort of
yeah.
rather sad little ping, really, wasn't it? Getting excited. We don't do emails anymore, do we?
Like I do sometimes, just for old times' sake.
Yes, it's almost like a postcard, isn't it? When you see an email.
Yeah,
I mean, how
yeah,
old school is
yeah.
that? Yeah. So did the band officially finish then in sort of '02 or '03?
Well, we actually got to the point of starting to record a third album.
Oh my
We're
God!
like, you know, like despite the fact that like distance learning didn't really get a lot of recognition, we were like really, really proud of it. I think it's the best thing that we did, and like I know Matt liked it. It sort of didn't sell as well as the first album, but it still sold. We still had people that were, that were keen on what we were like doing. We thought we'd done a really good album, and it seemed a bit churlish to just pack it in at like that point, because I thought, well, maybe it will get picked up on. Maybe if the third album sort of does well, people will start picking up on the older stuff. But yeah, we made some decisions about how to approach the third album that probably in retrospect were a bit not really the decisions that we ought to have made in sort of terms of changing the sound and like stripping it down a bit and sort of going for more sort of intricate, complicated songs rather than more kind of linear sort of groove-based things, which we've done in the past. So we started recording these songs, and while I thought it was still a good set of songs, it just didn't really work. It just wasn't coming together. I sort of didn't feel, and I know that I wasn't the only member of the band that felt it wasn't really sort of coming together. We had a good set of songs, but I just couldn't see how they were going to be made to work as group recordings, really. And like, because they were going off in a slightly different direction from what we were doing before, it sort of wasn't like a logical progression from the distance learning music to the music for the third album, which I never got as far as having a working title. I and at least sort of one other member of the band thought that if we carry on doing this, we'll end up with an album that like will get even less attention than what we had before, and it's just like pissing in the wind, really. Like, do we really want to put so much like effort into this and just like feel that we're just getting nowhere with it? So yeah, that was the point when we had, I suppose, a kind of email band meeting where it was, I think, 2.5, 1.5 in sort of favour of just packing it in at that point. There were two of us that thought it was worth finishing. One of us was sort of keen to like carry it on, and like another was like, I don't really mind one way or the other. So yeah, so it was January 2002, I think, was when we made that decision. So we had got some like unfinished recordings for the third album, but it sort of never got to the stage of being like almost finished. It sort of didn't even get to the stage of being halfway finished.
Oh no!
But, yeah, but I've still got demos of all the songs. So like we might at one point go back and finish it, and people can just like go, how did they fit so many jazz chords into that?
Is it the case? Have you still kept in touch with each other?
Yeah, we're sort of still in touch, definitely. Yeah, I mean, not like super regularly, but we'll still have sort of fun enough like email conversations, sort of rather than like any other
That's a classic
format, because we're old fashioned.
Yeah, I know, just so quaint. But did you sort of, was that the end of your musical kind of moment, so to speak?
So it was the end of mine. Yeah, I sort of didn't carry on making music at like that point. I actually went back to writing about it. I sort of moved back to writing. Sort of started doing like reviews and sort of pieces for like online magazines around that time.
Yes.
Yeah, I know sort of some of the other members carried on sort of doing music. But, like Steve is still in the band now, funnily enough. But,
wow. Really impressive.
Yeah.
What band's he
in? Warm Digits. Are you aware of them? They're doing reasonably well at the moment. They're a kind of, I suppose, an electro noise disco band from Newcastle.
Oh,
They've done about like 2 or 3 albums. They've done, yeah.
Warm Decent, yes, there you go. They're all there. Lots of new
Yeah.
material. There you go. So, yeah, so anyway, but there, at least you were in a band, you did singles and...
Yeah. I mean, I've sort of probably made this sound like it's a tale of, like Cody doing lots of things that we were proud of and no one paying any attention to it. But it kind of didn't really feel like at the time that sort of that was what the trajectory of our story was. It wasn't like, oh no, we just constantly on a hiding to nothing, hitting brick walls and that. I mean, it didn't really feel like that until at the very end. And I think it's only when I look back on it now that I realise, oh yeah, we didn't get very much press for the albums, and like we couldn't play live, and you couldn't buy the records in Oxford. That sort of sometimes maybe I dwell a bit too much on the negative aspect rather than saying we made 2 albums that I think are really good.
Yes. And a song called August, which is obviously a perfect one to play during this time of year, anyway. So
indeed.
Yeah, well, I'm so pleased. Well, thank you ever so much. I mean, if it was something that you could have said to your 16 or 18-year-old self starting out, is there any kind of words of wisdom that you would have imparted on them and just said, oh, look, I would do that, or I wouldn't do that, or, I just wonder if there was anything that kind of stands out in your mind.
I would probably say you could dress a bit better, mate, to start with. And also, I suppose I would probably tell myself to not think that like the indie scene is the only thing in your life. So to make sure that you live a fuller life than just hanging around in the indie scene like all day. Because it was great fun, absolutely fantastic. But I think by the time that I got to the 1990s, I thought there were some aspects of my life where I was a bit behind with it. I thought, I should have done a bit more about that in 86. Like learning to play guitar properly, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Yeah.
And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. If you're still listening, well done if you are. Anyway, that was me in conversation with Chris Tighe from Coda and much, much more. This has been the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, lucky you. You can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just do C86 show. Also, these have all been archived, so you can find them on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. These are the interviews. And if you do contact me, keep it positive and nice. Otherwise, frankly, Mr. Shankly, don't bother. But look, have a great week, stay safe, and all the best.